Okay, so this is the Bible study for Exodus chapter 17, and the text says, "The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, 'Give us water to drink.' Moses replied, 'Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?' But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?' Then Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me.' The Lord answered Moses, 'Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I'll stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink.' So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massa and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?' The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose some of our men to go out and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands.' So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven.' Moses built an altar and called it, 'The Lord is my banner.' He said, 'Because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation.'" And I believe we just had, if you're studying with us, this at the same time as we're studying this, we just recently studied in First Samuel when this prophecy was fulfilled. So number one in our Bible study, remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive and follow along with us as we study this scripture. Number one says, what did we talk about last week in chapter 16? Manna and quail. At least that's what the heading in my Bible says. If you're slick and you weren't here last week, or you don't remember that well from week to week, you might just look quick back at your Bible on that page and find that that's the best you can do. Maybe it'll jog your memory of what you learned. B, trusting in God for his provision. That's what it was about on the day-to-day collection of the manna, and trusting that God would have it there, and they weren't allowed to collect multiple days worth, except for the day before the Sabbath. And when they tried to collect multiple because they didn't trust God for their provision the next day, there were worms in it. It rotted. And then C, taking Sabbath and trusting in God's provision there too, rather than believing we have to work to get things done even on the day that was to be devoted to God. So then God did tell them to collect 2 days worth on the day before the Sabbath, and that did not rot, and worms did not infest it. But when they tried to go out and collect it on the Sabbath, there was none there. And so this was another way of trusting God. Isn't it interesting that both were trusting God? The not collecting more than they needed for the day was trusting God, and the collecting 2 days worth on the day before the Sabbath and not going out on the Sabbath to collect it yourself was also trusting God. And you would think that if God was sort of a one size fits all rule type of God, then um, he would just say, don't collect any more than you need any day. Or he might say, you should rest periodically, so collect more than you want whenever you want, or one more than you need whenever you need. But he's not a one size fits all legalistic rule following type of God. He's a God who wants us to have relationship with him and trust in him, which meant most days they were to follow his instructions and not collect more than they needed. And then one day they were to follow his instructions also and collect enough for the next day so that they could take that as a day of rest devoted to God. And I would say we much prefer having a one size fits all type of rule to follow than a constant trust in a living and active God. And so this is something that we should consider. Number 2 says, what happened in 17:1-3? So that's in this text for today. The Israelites set out again, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. In other words, he was leading them where to go at every point. So they were going where he commanded each day and staying when he commanded to stay. And there are other texts that you can read in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books of the Bible, that explain exactly how they decided when to set up camp and when they decided to tear down and get ready to go. And God was leading them at every point. So that's what it means by as the Lord commanded. They did it as the Lord commanded, which is important given what happens in this story. What happens next? B, again, there was no water for people to drink. But they were going where and how God commanded them, where and when God commanded them. So God has this under control, right? But they don't seem to think that he does. See, the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And then D, they again decided they were better off in Egypt, the place where they had asked God to deliver them from slavery. So now all of a sudden they're second guessing what they had asked God to do for them originally, and they don't like what God has done here. And we say this. I'm kind of giving away an answer here, but um, they said, "Is God with us here or not? Is He among us or not?" Number 3, have they not yet learned about the provision of God? Why are they complaining? Why are they grumbling and arguing? Do they not know that if God has led them there, that he will take care of them? Have they not yet learned about his provision? And we can say, well, apparently not. But then the second part of this question is, have you? Or do you also grumble at every point, even when God has led you in the past and you know God is supposed to be with you? He's brought you here. Um, Number 4 says, what did Moses ask God in verse 4? Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. What am I going to do with you? And that's what parents sometimes say with their kids, but this is what Moses is saying. What am I going to do with these people? Now they're ready to stone me. They're almost ready to kill me because uh, of their frustration about their circumstances, and they don't trust God in them. The second part says, what was God's answer? A, he told them to stand in front of the elders of Israel with his staff, the one from the previous miracles. He says specifically, go with the elders in front of the people, but then he says, stand before the elders so that he's doing it, yes, in front of all the people, but specifically in front of the elders of the people, because the elders are the leaders. They're the ones that get your families under control, get your families in line. Help, can you show your people, lead your families, and show them that God is faithful. So I'm going to do this, yes, in front of the people, but specifically in front of you, the leaders of your families. And so God tells Moses to do this specifically in front of the elders, but also in front of all the people. B, God is going to be there too. He says, I'm going to stand before you. And he told him to strike the rock and water will come out. And so God is going to provide water through Moses in front of all the people, and specifically in front of the elders, to remind them once again that he is faithful. And if he's led them out here, he is going to take care of them. They don't need to get upset and freaked out and angry and get ready to stone Moses. Number 5, what did he call this place and why? So this is interesting. He called it Massa, which according to the footnote in my Bible means testing. And they called it Meribah, which means quarreling. Because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So what they were saying was, is the Lord with us? And they were testing God, asking God, trying to make God come through in the way they wanted him to, and the way they expected him to. Not in his timing, but when they get thirsty, they want him to come through. So they were quarreling with Moses, but they were really testing God by questioning whether he was even really there. Number 6, what happened next? In verse 8, it says the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. So now, if it wasn't bad enough that they didn't have any water, now they're being attacked by the Amalekites out here in the desert. And what does Moses tell Joshua in verse 9? Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men to go and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So gather some people, create an army out of our people. Number 7, what did Moses, Aaron, and Hur do while Joshua was fighting, according to verses 10 through 12? A, they went to the top of the hill, which is what he just said he was going to do before. B, as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. So there was something in Moses' hands. Now, of course, we know the staff of God was there too. So this wasn't some power Moses had, but Moses really was calling down upon the people the power of God. And there was something to this physical demonstration. And I don't know that we really fully understand why. But we do know that there was something connected with Moses holding up his hands. So it says, when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. So, you know, I don't know if you can visualize what this is describing, but Moses was standing with his hands up and the staff in his hands. And when he got tired, they set him down on a rock so he'd be shorter so they could hold up his hands, because otherwise, in order to hold his hands up effectively, they would have to be taller than him, or at least as tall as him. So they sat him down, and then they could hold up his hands. So I think sometimes people, they didn't stack rocks under his arms. They sat him down on a rock so that they could hold up his arms. Number 8, what was the result according to verse 13? It says, so Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And the second part says, why do you think it mattered? Why do you think it mattered whether Moses's hands remained in the air. Um, we don't really know, but we do know this, that every time God was needed to come through for Israel, God um, did a work through the hands of Moses and this staff. And we see God doing that time and time again. And so this staff and Moses's hands at some level represented the hand of God, the power of God coming to bear on the situation. And so we're not sure entirely the significance of all that, but here's what we know is this was about God's power coming to bear on the Israelite situation, because every time the staff was involved and every time Moses' hands were called to get involved with this staff, um, in the presence of God and the activity of God, um, worked a miracle for the people of God. So that's why it mattered. They needed God involved, and this is what it looked like for them, for God to be involved. God often got involved through the hand of Moses and through this staff. Um, Remember, this is the same staff that Moses threw down and it became a snake, and he picked it up and it turned back into a staff. This is the staff that just at the beginning of this text he struck the rock with, and water came out. This is not a magic staff, but there it represents God's activity in among the people. So God works through it, and he works through the hands of Moses. Number 9, how do we apply this text? A, we're pretty sure that the spiritual leader should always have his hands up. Well, probably not literally, but figuratively, if those hands up, meaning up, mean that I need the power of God, we need the power of God in this situation, then yes, the spiritual leader should always have his hands up or her hands up. But not necessarily literally. That would look funny. Um, and we don't need to worry that if something's going wrong in one of the ministries of the church, that the problem is that Pastor Pete must have taken a nap and doesn't have his hands up. Where's he at? Let's get his hands up again. Um, Not at least in a physical way. B, we always need the help of God. Perhaps it is when we start thinking we can win the battle without the help of God, that is when we lose. And so if our hands up represent God, we need your presence in this situation, then we need to live hands up. And the leader needs to live hands up for sure. The leader of a particular church, or the leader of a ministry, the leader of people of God, a mentor, whoever, whatever ministry you're involved in, you need the presence of God and you need to live hands up. Although not necessarily literally, hands up being meaning a recognition that we need God. And it was really cool that in this case, there was a very physical representation to the spiritual need that everybody could see. Because I know we can say we're not talking about literal, and we can say we're not going to be legalistic here, but I know how easy it is if there's not some kind of representation of our desperate need for God. It's very easy for us to forget our need for God, and instead to begin to think that we've got this under control and our hands can be down controlling it, instead of up recognizing our need for God. um, C, we can apply this to know that our leaders carry a heavy weight. They may not always be able to bear it alone. So here Moses needs his hands to be up that is a great burden on him. So much so that his hands got tired and they began to droop. And and he needed help to keep his hands up. He couldn't bear the burden of all of Israel alone. D, we pray for our leaders. Well, that is probably, let me just say, that is the rightest wrong answer that's here, or the wrongest right answer that's here. Um, it is certainly probably the most common interpretation, and it is not wrong in that way. Please, we absolutely should pray for our leaders. Please pray for your leaders, both in this nation and in the church. Pray for your leaders, um, but don't only pray for your leaders. So what I mean by that is, Aaron and Hur didn't get down on their knees and begin praying to God. They grabbed a hold of Moses's arms. So E, we jump in to help. There was almost certainly prayer involved in the story, but there was also physical action as people helped bear the burden of the physical effort that Moses was carrying alone until he could no more. So what I'm saying here is that it is a cop out for you to say I'm praying for my leader and not do anything to help. If you know your leader is carrying a burden, do something to help carry it. Go to prayer for your leader, and I believe God will tell you that there is something that you can do to help, and then do it. Okay. And so it's like in James where it says, you know, you um, you want proof that faith without deeds is useless. He says you say to somebody, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but you don't do anything to help them, it's worthless. So in a lot of ways, that's what we do in the church for our leaders, for our pastors. We say, Pastor, I'm praying for you. Go, bear this burden alone, but with my prayers. That's what we say. Instead of saying, Pastor, what do you need from me? Pastor, I'll be there at such and such time and I can do anything you need. I'll help. I'll pick up trash. I'll move things around. What do you need from me? I can help. And I think in the church we have kind of an epidemic of laziness excused by prayer. Um, and that's not what was going on here. I want to just really point out that if we can interpret it, we need to pray for our leaders, and that's not entirely wrong, but it's not enough. Okay, we also have to step in and physically hold the hands up. And I'm talking now physically do something figurative, is what I'm saying, because the hands up is figurative, but the action is physical. So, what is it that you can do to support your leader as your leader keeps everybody reminded that we need God, and God is the one that takes action? What is it that you can do to support the physical ministry that the church does, and make sure it doesn't fall only on one or a few? There's something physically you can do that is in addition to your prayers, that God would be involved and that God would support your spiritual leaders. And so I really think it's important that I don't think we are fully interpreting this right if it becomes a purely spiritual concept. If it's just we need to pray for our pastor, it's got to be, we need to lift up, not just in prayer, but physically lift up our pastor or our pastors or our leaders in our church. which means we need to be there when we hear that there's a ministry going on and there's going to be pastors and leaders from the church there. We need to be there and physically hold up the hands of our leaders. So I really think that that's a better and fuller interpretation of this text than one that sort of tends to become a cop out, I'm afraid, for a lot of believers.